Part 1: The phone call that changed everything. The rain hammered against my study window that October evening, each drop seeming to echo the pounding of my heart as I listened to my daughter's voice crack on the other end of the line. Sarah had always been strong, too strong sometimes, inheriting my stubborn streak, but now she sounded broken in a way that made my chest tighten. "Dad, I don't know what to do," she whispered, and I could hear my two grandchildren crying in the background. Emma was 6 and little Michael had just turned 3. "Derek sold the house, he actually sold it. We have 30 days to get out and I didn't even know it was happening." I set down the legal brief I'd been reviewing, my lawyer's instincts immediately kicking into high gear even as my father's heart shattered. "What do you mean he sold it? Sarah, that's your home, you're on the deed, aren't you?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "He told me it would be easier for tax purposes if only his name was on it," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "He said it was just a formality that married couples did it all the time. I trusted him, Dad, I trusted him with everything." I closed my eyes, fighting the surge of anger that threatened to overwhelm my ability to think clearly. I'd never liked Derek Mitchell from the moment Sarah brought him home 7 years ago. There was something in his eyes, a calculating quality that he masked with charm and a ready smile. But Sarah had been so in love, so certain, and I'd learned long ago that sometimes you have to let your children make their own choices, even when you can see the cliff they're walking toward. "Where are you right now?" I asked, already reaching for my car keys. "We're at a motel off Highway 9, the Sundown Inn. Dad, I'm so sorry, I should have listened to you, I should have." "Stop," I said firmly but gently. "We'll figure this out, I'm coming to you right now. Don't talk to Derek, don't sign anything, and don't make any decisions until I get there. Do you understand?" "Okay," she whispered. "Dad, thank you." As I drove through the storm toward the motel, my mind raced through everything I knew about Derek Mitchell. He worked in real estate development, or so he claimed, though his projects seemed to change as often as his stories. He drove expensive cars, wore designer suits, and always had an explanation for why his next big deal was just around the corner. Sarah's teacher's salary had been supporting them for the past 3 years while Derek positioned himself for success. The property in question was a beautiful 3-bedroom house in Oakmont Heights, one of the better neighborhoods in our mid-sized city. Sarah and Derek had bought it 5 years ago with money Sarah had inherited from her mother, my late wife, Catherine, who had died of cancer 8 years earlier. Catherine's life insurance payout had been $200,000, and Sarah had used $150,000 as a down payment on that house, with dreams of raising her children in a safe, stable neighborhood with good schools. Now apparently, Derek had sold it out from under her. The Sundown Inn was exactly as depressing as its name suggested, a strip of rooms with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that cast sickly shadows across the parking lot. I found Sarah's room and knocked gently. When the door opened, my heart broke all over again. My daughter looked like she'd aged 10 years in the weeks since I'd last seen her. Her auburn hair, usually so carefully styled, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. But it was the look of defeat on her face that gutted me. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into my arms as she finally let herself break down completely. Emma and Michael were watching television on one of the beds, their small faces uncertain as they glanced between their mother and grandfather. I gave them my best reassuring smile over Sarah's shoulder, but I'm not sure how convincing it was. Once Sarah had cried herself out and the children were settled with the sandwiches I'd picked up on the way, we sat at the small table in the corner of the room and she told me everything. Derek had been acting strangely for months, she said, taking phone calls in private, spending long hours away from home, becoming increasingly irritable when she asked questions. She'd attributed it to work stress. He'd told her he was working on his biggest deal yet, something that would set them up for life. She'd believed him because she wanted to believe him, because they had 2 children together and 7 years of marriage, and all the reasons people give themselves to ignore the red flags waving right in front of their faces. 3 days ago, she'd come home from work to find a for sale sign in the front yard. When she'd confronted Derek, he'd been casual about it, saying he'd found a buyer willing to pay well above market value and it was too good an opportunity to pass up. He assured her he had a plan, that he'd found them a temporary place while he finalized his big deal, and that this was actually going to work out better for everyone. Sarah, conditioned by years of trusting him and wanting to believe the best, had reluctantly gone along with it, though alarm bells were ringing. Those alarm bells became sirens when she came home 2 days later to find the house almost entirely empty. Derek had sold not just the house but most of their furniture, claiming the buyer had wanted it as part of the package. He'd moved what remained of their belongings into a storage unit and presented Sarah with the key to this motel room. He said it would just be for a few weeks, Sarah told me, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. He said his deal was about to close and we'd be moving into something even better. But Dad, when I asked him about the money from the house sale, he got angry, really angry in a way I'd never seen before. He told me not to question him, that he knew what he was doing and that I should trust him to take care of his family. When did you last see him? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Yesterday morning. He said he had meetings all day and would be back by evening, but he never came. He's not answering his phone. I went by the storage unit this afternoon and Dad, it's empty, everything's gone. Even the kids' toys, their clothes, the photo albums from when Mom was alive, everything. I felt a cold fury settle over me, the kind that comes not from hot rage but from calculated understanding. Derek hadn't just sold their house, he'd systematically stripped Sarah of everything and then disappeared. This wasn't impulsive or desperate, this was planned. I need you to tell me everything you know about his business dealings, I said, pulling out my phone to take notes. Names, companies, properties, bank accounts. Anything you can remember. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah told me everything she could recall. I filled page after page in my notes app with names and details, my legal mind already beginning to construct a picture of what Derek had been doing. It wasn't pretty, but it was starting to make sense. Derek, it seemed, had been running a long con, not just on Sarah but on multiple investors and business partners. He'd been using the house, which was worth approximately $450,000 based on current market values, as collateral for various loans and investments without Sarah's knowledge. When those schemes started to collapse, he decided to cash out and disappear rather than face the consequences. Did he ever have you sign any papers? I asked. Anything at all, even if he said it was just a formality. Sarah thought for a moment, then her face paled. There were some documents a few months ago. He said they were tax forms that we needed to file jointly for some investment income he'd received. I signed where he told me to sign. Dad, did I sign away the house? We'll find out, I assured her, though my gut told me Derek had been more clever than that. If Sarah's name had never been on the deed, he wouldn't have needed her signature to sell it. But those documents she'd signed might be something else entirely, perhaps loan papers or transfer documents for other assets. I made calls that night that I hadn't made in years, reaching out to old law school classmates who'd gone into different specialties, calling in favors from private investigators I'd worked with on cases, even contacting a former client who now worked in the district attorney's office. By the time I left the motel at 2 in the morning, with Sarah and the children sleeping in slightly more peaceful exhaustion, I had a plan beginning to form. But I also made another decision that night, one that would define everything that followed. Derek Mitchell had hurt my daughter and grandchildren in the most calculated way possible. He'd stolen not just money but security, stability, and trust. And while I'd spent my career working within the legal system, always playing by the rules, always believing in the power of justice through proper channels, I knew that sometimes the law moved too slowly and left too many loopholes for people like Derek. So I decided that yes, we would pursue every legal avenue available, but I would also pursue something else, a more personal form of justice that Derek would never see coming. Part 2: Following the Money. The next morning, I cleared my schedule. As a semi-retired attorney who took on only consulting work these days, I had the flexibility to dedicate myself fully to this situation. My first stop was my office, where I had resources and privacy to begin my investigation in earnest. My assistant, Margaret, had been with me for 25 years and had known Sarah since she was in elementary school. When I explained the situation, her face went through the same journey mine had: shock, sympathy, and finally settling into grim determination. "What do you need?" she asked simply. "Everything you can find on Derek Mitchell. And I mean everything: credit reports, property records, business filings, social media, parking tickets. I want to know every move he's made for the last 7 years." Margaret nodded and got to work while I started making calls. My first was to James Chen, a private investigator I'd worked with on numerous cases over the years. James was thorough, discreet, and had connections that could find information that didn't officially exist. "Robert," James answered on the second ring. "It's been too long, what can I do for you?" I explained the situation and James listened without interruption, a skill that made him excellent at his job. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "This guy sounds like a real piece of work," he said finally. "But if he's been running the kind of con you're describing, he'll have left a trail. People like that always do. They think they're smarter than everyone else, and that overconfidence makes them sloppy." "How quickly can you start?" "I'm on it now. Send me everything you have and I'll check in with you by end of day." My next call was to Patricia Alvarez, a real estate attorney who specialized in property fraud. I'd known Patricia for 15 years, and while we'd occasionally been on opposite sides of cases, we'd developed a mutual respect and had stayed in touch. "Robert, what a surprise," Patricia said warmly. "How have you been?" "I've been better," I admitted, and launched into another explanation of Sarah's situation. Patricia's warmth shifted to professional concern. "That's a tricky situation. If his name was the only one on the deed, then legally he had the right to sell the property. But the fact that Sarah's inheritance funded the down payment creates an interesting wrinkle. And if she signed documents without fully understanding what they were, we might have grounds for fraud or misrepresentation." "That's what I was thinking. Can you look into the property records for me, find out when exactly Derek's name went on the deed, whether Sarah's was ever on it, and what the actual sale terms were?" "Consider it done. I'll also check for any liens or encumbrances on the property. If Derek was using it as collateral like you suspect, there should be a public record of that." By noon, I had a team assembled. James Chen on investigation, Patricia Alvarez on property law, Marcus Webb from the district attorney's office unofficially advising on potential criminal charges, and my old friend Timothy Harrison, a forensic accountant who could trace money through the most complicated shell games. I also did something I hadn't done in years. I hired a young, hungry associate from a prestigious law firm in the city. Her name was Jennifer Kowalski, and she'd reached out to me months ago asking if I'd mentor her. At the time, I declined, feeling too settled in my semi-retirement. But now I needed someone with energy, current knowledge of case law, and the time to do the kind of deep research this case would require. Jennifer met me at my office that afternoon, her eyes bright with interest as I explained what I needed. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair with a slight smile. "Mr. Patterson, with all due respect, this sounds less like a mentorship opportunity and more like you're assembling a team to destroy someone." I met her gaze steadily. "That man stole everything from my daughter and grandchildren. He planned it, executed it, and then abandoned them in a motel with nothing. So yes, Jennifer, I am going to destroy him. But I'm going to do it legally, thoroughly, and in a way that ensures he can never do this to anyone else. If that doesn't interest you, I understand, and there will be no hard feelings." Jennifer's smile widened. "Mr. Patterson, I didn't say I wasn't interested. I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page about objectives. When do we start?" "We already have." Over the next week, information began pouring in from my various sources, and the picture that emerged was even worse than I'd imagined. Derek Mitchell wasn't just a con artist. He was a prolific one who'd been operating under multiple variations of his name and through numerous shell companies for at least a decade. James Chen's investigation revealed that Derek Mitchell was actually Derek Mitchelson, who had changed his name 7 years ago just before meeting Sarah. Before that, he'd been Derek Michaels, and before that, Derek Milston. Each identity came with a trail of angry investors, unpaid debts, and women who'd been romanced and robbed. "Your daughter wasn't his first victim," James told me during our meeting on Friday afternoon, spreading photographs and documents across my conference table. "She wasn't even his fifth. This guy has a pattern. He targets women with assets, usually inheritance money or insurance payouts, romances them, gets access to their finances, and then systematically drains them before moving on to the next mark." I stared at the photographs of 3 other women, all looking remarkably similar to Sarah, educated, professional, in their late 20s to mid-30s when Derek had met them. All had been left with nothing. "Why hasn't he been arrested?" I asked, my voice tight with controlled fury. "Because he's careful," James explained. "He uses the legal system against his victims. Everything is technically legal on paper. He gets them to sign documents, to put his name on accounts, to transfer assets willingly. By the time they realize what's happening, he's gone, and proving fraud is difficult when there's so much apparent consent involved." "What about these other women? Did any of them press charges?" "2 tried. Both cases were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. The third woman, well, she didn't make it. Suicide 2 years ago." The room went very quiet. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Tell me about her." James slid a file across the table. Michelle Brennan, she was a nurse in Portland, Oregon, inherited $180,000 when her father died, met Derek at a medical conference where he was supposedly networking for a healthcare startup. They were married within a year. 18 months later, she was penniless, divorced, and living in her car. She overdosed on medications she'd taken from the hospital. Left a note specifically nomming Derek and what he'd done to her. I opened the file and looked at Michelle Brennan's photograph. She had kind eyes and a gentle smile. She'd been 32 when she died. Was there an investigation? Cursory, by the time she died, Derek was already gone. Different name, different city. The police in Portland didn't have the resources or jurisdiction to pursue it, especially since the financial aspects of the case were technically civil matters, not criminal. I closed the file carefully, making a decision in that moment that would shape everything that followed. Derek Mitchell, or whatever his real name was, wouldn't just pay for what he'd done to Sarah. He'd pay for all of it. For Michelle Brennan and the 2 other women and however many more victims there might be that we hadn't found yet. Find them, I told James. Find every woman he's done this to. I want to talk to all of them. Patricia Alvarez's investigation into the property records yielded equally disturbing information. The house in Oakmont Heights had been purchased 5 years ago for $320,000, with Sarah's $150,000 inheritance covering the down payment and closing costs. The deed had been put solely in Derek's name, with Sarah listed only on the mortgage application as a co-applicant to qualify for better rates. That should have been a red flag right there, Patricia said, her frustration evident. But I see this all the time. One partner convinces the other that it's just paperwork, that it doesn't matter whose name is on what because they're married and everything is shared anyway. Then when things go south, the partner without legal title is left with no recourse. But the fact that Sarah's money funded the purchase must count for something, I argued. It does, in theory. She could potentially claim an equitable interest in the property based on her financial contribution. But Derek sold the house 3 weeks ago for $485,000. The money from the sale went directly into an account under his name alone, and that account was emptied 2 days later. Multiple wire transfers to offshore accounts that we're still trying to trace. So even if we could prove Sarah has a claim to the property value, the money is gone. Not necessarily gone, Patricia corrected. Just hidden. That's where your forensic accountant comes in. Timothy Harrison, the forensic accountant, had been working around the clock to follow the money trail. What he'd found was a labyrinth of shell companies, offshore accounts, and carefully structured transactions designed to obscure the ultimate destination of the funds. This guy isn't working alone, Timothy told me during our video conference. The structure is too sophisticated. He's either incredibly well-versed in international finance or he's got someone helping him, maybe a lawyer or accountant who specializes in this kind of thing. Can you trace where the money went? I can trace where it went first, second, and third. After that, it gets murky. But I've got colleagues in the Caymans and Switzerland who owe me favors. Give me another week and I'll have something for you. Meanwhile, Jennifer Kowalski was building our legal case from every possible angle. She'd found precedents for fraud claims in situations like Sarah's, cases where one spouse had systematically deceived another about financial matters. She'd also discovered that Derek had never actually divorced his previous wife, the one before Michelle Brennan, which meant his marriage to Sarah might be invalid, which created a whole new set of legal implications. If Derek was still legally married to his previous wife when he married Sarah, then Sarah's marriage is void, Jennifer explained during one of our strategy sessions. Which means she wasn't actually his spouse, which means the legal protections that normally apply to married couples don't apply here. Is that good or bad for us? I asked. Both. Bad because it means Sarah can't claim spousal rights to the property or assets. Good because it means we might be able to pursue criminal charges for fraud and theft that would normally be considered civil matters between spouses. Marcus Webb from the DA's office confirmed this. If the marriage was fraudulent from the start, and he used that fraudulent relationship to obtain money and property under false pretenses, that's criminal fraud. Add in the fact that he's done this multiple times under different names, and we're looking at organized fraud, potentially even RICO charges if we can prove it was an ongoing criminal enterprise. What do you need to move forward with charges? I asked. Victims willing to testify, paper trails showing a pattern of behavior, evidence that he intended to deceive from the beginning. That's the tricky part, and ideally we need to know where he is now so we can actually arrest him. That was the one piece of the puzzle we didn't have. Derek Mitchell had vanished completely. His phone was disconnected, his social media accounts deleted, and none of his known associates had seen or heard from him. It was as if he'd simply evaporated. But I knew he was out there somewhere, probably already working on his next victim, confident that he'd gotten away with it once again. He had no idea that this time would be different. Part 3: Building the Case. 2 weeks after Sarah's devastating phone call, I called a meeting of my entire team at my office. Sarah was there too, along with 2 of Derek's previous victims whom James had located and convinced to join us. The first was Rebecca Torres, a software engineer from Denver who'd lost $125,000 to Derek 4 years ago. The second was Amanda Chen, a veterinarian from Seattle who'd been Derek's victim 6 years ago and had lost not just her $95,000 inheritance but also her veterinary practice, which Derek had convinced her to mortgage for one of his investment opportunities. Watching these 3 women sit together, seeing the recognition and shared pain in their eyes, was both heartbreaking and galvanizing. They'd each thought they were alone, that they'd been uniquely foolish to fall for Derek's lies. Now they realized they were part of a pattern, victims of a predator who'd refined his technique over years of practice. "Thank you all for coming," I said, standing at the head of the conference table. "I know this isn't easy revisiting what he did to you, but I want you to understand something. What Derek did to each of you wasn't your fault. He's a professional criminal who's been doing this for at least a decade, probably longer. He's skilled at identifying targets, gaining trust, and exploiting that trust. You're not stupid or weak for falling for it. You're victims of a crime, and it's time we treated this as what it is." I gestured to the materials spread across the table: charts, timelines, financial records, and photographs documenting Derek's pattern of behavior across multiple identities and victims. "Here's what we know," I continued. "Derek has been operating under at least 5 different name variations. He's victimized at least 7 women that we've identified, stealing a total of approximately $800,000. Each time he follows the same pattern. Meet a woman with assets, usually inherited money or an insurance payout, establish a romantic relationship quickly, propose marriage within a year, gain access to finances, systematically drain those finances through fake business investments and property schemes, then disappear and reinvent himself in a new city with a new name." Jennifer pulled up a PowerPoint presentation showing Derek's timeline. "The sophistication has increased over time. His earlier victims lost smaller amounts and he left more obvious trails. But with each iteration, he's gotten better at covering his tracks, at structuring the theft so it appears legal on the surface, and at choosing victims who are less likely to pursue legal action." "Why are we less likely to pursue legal action?" Amanda Chen asked, her voice bitter. "Because we're ashamed, because we think it's our fault." "Partly that," Jennifer acknowledged. "But also because he specifically targets women in certain professional fields: teachers, nurses, veterinarians, social workers. People in helping professions who tend to be trusting, who want to believe the best in people, and who often don't have the financial resources to pursue lengthy legal battles." "That's going to change," I said firmly. "We're building a criminal case against Derek that will put him in prison for a very long time, but I'm not going to lie to you, it's going to be difficult. We need each of you willing to testify about what he did. We need to track down every document, every transaction, every communication you had with him, and we need to find him." "What if we can't find him?" Sarah asked quietly. "What if he's just gone?" "He's not gone," James Chen said, speaking up from his position near the back of the room. "Men like Derek don't just disappear, they go somewhere new and start the pattern over, and that's going to be his downfall." James walked to the front of the room and pulled up a new slide, a photograph of a man who looked like Derek but with slightly different features. Beard instead of clean-shaven, glasses instead of contacts, hair dyed darker. "Is that him?" Rebecca Torres leaned forward, squinting at the image. "We think so." This photo was taken 3 days ago at a real estate investors conference in Phoenix, Arizona. The man in the photo is registered at the conference under the name David Michaels. Notice the initials are the same, DM. It's a common pattern with serial con artists. They keep the same initials to avoid slip-ups with monograms or signatures. My heart rate accelerated. Are we sure it's him? "Not 100% yet, but look at this." James pulled up a second photo, this one showing the same man talking to a woman at the conference. Facial recognition software gives us an 87% match to Derek Mitchell. And look at his body language with this woman, the same pattern we've seen before. Intense eye contact, slight lean forward, hand gestures that mirror hers. He's already working his next mark. The room fell silent as we all stared at the image of Derek, or David, beginning his predatory dance all over again. "Who is she?" I asked. "Her name is Dr. Lisa Brennan. She's a pediatrician from Scottsdale. Recently widowed, her husband died in a car accident 8 months ago, life insurance payout of $250,000 plus equity in their home." Sarah made a small sound of distress. "We have to warn her." "We will," I assured her, "but we have to be smart about it. If we approach her directly, Derek will spook and disappear again. We need to catch him first." Marcus Webb leaned forward. "If we can confirm that's Derek in Phoenix, I can work with the Arizona authorities to have him picked up on the outstanding warrant from Portland, the fraud case from Michelle Brennan. It's still technically active even though it went cold. That'll give us time to build the bigger case." "There's another option," Timothy Harrison said, his tone thoughtful. Everyone turned to look at him. "I've been following the money and I think I know where Derek is keeping it." He pulled up a complex flowchart showing the path of funds from Sarah's house sale and other victims through various shell companies and offshore accounts. "The money moves around a lot, but it ultimately ends up in an investment account registered to a trust in the Cayman Islands. The trust is called Beacon Holdings, and while the beneficial owner is hidden behind nominee directors and registered agents, I've found some patterns in the trading behavior that suggest whoever controls this account has been actively using the funds." "Can we freeze it?" I asked. "With the right court orders and international cooperation, yes, but it takes time." However, Timothy's smile turned predatory. "I may have found a shortcut. The trust uses a private wealth management firm in the Caymans called Meridian Financial Services. I have a contact there who's been very helpful in other cases. If we can prove that the funds in the account are proceeds of criminal activity, Meridian will freeze the account pending investigation. They're very protective of their reputation and don't want to be associated with money laundering." "How do we prove it's criminal proceeds?" "We give them what we've gathered: the pattern of fraud, the victims' testimonies, the paper trail. It won't be enough for criminal prosecution yet, but it'll be enough for a reputable financial institution to cover their ass by freezing the account." I looked around the room at my team, at the victims who'd become allies, at the evidence we'd compiled. We were close, not quite there yet, but close. "Okay," I said, "here's how we're going to do this. James, I need you on the ground in Phoenix. Confirm that's Derek and keep eyes on him but stay invisible. Jennifer, work with Marcus to get the Portland warrant reactivated and coordinate with Arizona authorities for the arrest. Timothy, contact your person in the Caymans and start the process of freezing that account. Patricia, I need you to file civil claims on behalf of all the victims against Derek and any entities we can connect to him. That'll help establish the paper trail and create additional legal pressure." "What about Dr. Brennan?" Sarah asked. "The woman he's targeting in Phoenix." I thought about that for a moment. "We warn her, but carefully. James, can you approach her in a way that doesn't tip off Derek?" "I can try, but if she's already falling for his routine, she might not believe me." "Then we'll have to be persuasive. Show her the evidence, introduce her to the other victims, make it real for her." Amanda Chen spoke up. "I'll talk to her. If seeing another woman who's been through it doesn't convince her, nothing will." Over the next 72 hours, everything moved into high gear. James flew to Phoenix and confirmed that David Michaels was indeed Derek Mitchell. He'd had extensive plastic surgery, subtle work that altered his appearance just enough to make recognition difficult without changing his basic features. The beard and glasses added to the disguise, but it was definitely him. Timothy's contact in the Caymans came through magnificently. Presented with the evidence of fraud and the pattern of criminal behavior, Meridian Financial Services immediately froze the Beacon Holdings account pending investigation. The account contained just over $1.2 million, not just Sarah's money but the accumulated theft from years of fraud. Jennifer and Marcus worked their magic with the legal system. The Portland warrant was reactivated and Arizona authorities agreed to pick up Derek on that warrant while we built the larger case. Everything was in place. But then Derek made an unexpected move. James called me in a panic on the third evening. "We've got a problem. Derek just proposed to Dr. Brennan. They're at a restaurant right now and he's got a ring. I think he's accelerating his timeline." "Why would he do that?" "I don't know, but it can't be good. Maybe he knows something's wrong, maybe he noticed surveillance, or maybe he's just getting bold because it's worked so many times before." I made a decision. Approach her, now tonight before she says yes, show her everything, and if Derek sees you and runs, call the police immediately and we'll execute the warrant. Are you sure if we spook him now? James, we can't let him marry another victim, do it. What happened next I heard about later from James's detailed report and from Dr. Lisa Brennan herself, who would eventually become an important part of bringing Derek to justice. James approached their table just as Derek was opening the ring box. Dr. Brennan looked up, startled, as this stranger approached them. Dr. Brennan, James said calmly but firmly. My name is James Chen. I'm a private investigator and I need to speak with you urgently about the man you're with. His real name isn't David Michaels and he's not who he claims to be. Derek's face went through a fascinating series of changes: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally, cold fury. Who the hell are you? Dr. Brennan, don't listen to this man, he's clearly delusional or... His name is Derek Mitchell, James continued, pulling out his phone and showing her a photo. This is what he looked like before the plastic surgery. He's a con artist who's defrauded at least 7 women out of more than $1 million combined. He was married to my client's daughter, stole her inheritance and her home, and left her and 2 children homeless in a motel. Derek stood up abruptly. This is insane, Lisa, we should leave. But Dr. Brennan was looking at the phone, at the photos James was showing her: Derek with Sarah, Derek with Rebecca, Derek with Amanda. In each photo he had the same expression, the same body language, like snapshots of the same scene repeated with different women. I have 4 women outside who can tell you exactly what he did to them, James said. Please just give me 5 minutes of your time. If after hearing what they have to say you still want to marry this man, I'll leave and never bother you again. Derek made his choice in that moment. Instead of trying to continue the deception, instead of attempting to explain or defend himself, he simply ran. He bolted from the restaurant, leaving Dr. Brennan sitting there in shock, leaving the ring on the table, leaving James already calling the police and giving chase. Derek made it 3 blocks before Arizona State Police, already positioned nearby in coordination with our plan, intercepted him. He tried to fight, actually threw punches at the officers before being tackled to the ground and handcuffed. The arrest was captured on multiple police body cameras and would later prove very useful in court. Derek shouting that this was all a misunderstanding, that his name was David Michaels and he'd done nothing wrong, even as the officers read him his rights and informed him he was being arrested on an outstanding warrant from Portland, Oregon. I got the call at 9:47 p.m. Phoenix time, 11:47 p.m. my time. I was still at the office with Sarah and the other victims, waiting for news. We got him, James said simply. The room erupted in cheers, tears, and embraces. Sarah collapsed into my arms, sobbing with relief and release. Rebecca and Amanda held each other, years of pain and anger finally finding an outlet. But I knew this was just the beginning. We'd caught Derek, yes, but now came the harder part, making sure he paid for everything he'd done and ensuring he could never do it to anyone else. Part 4: The Reckoning. Derek's arrest made local news in Phoenix and Portland, but it was just a small story, one more con artist caught, nothing particularly special. The news reports identified him as Derek Mitchell, wanted on fraud charges from Portland, arrested at an upscale restaurant while apparently in the process of proposing to another potential victim. What the news didn't report was the flurry of legal activity that immediately followed. Within 24 hours of Derek's arrest, we had filed a coordinated series of civil suits on behalf of all 7 confirmed victims, seeking recovery of the stolen funds plus damages. Jennifer had done brilliant work, structuring the suits to freeze any assets Derek might have access to and to pierce the corporate veils of his various shell companies. Marcus Webb worked with the Portland DA's office to upgrade the charges from simple fraud to organized criminal activity. With testimony from multiple victims showing a clear pattern of behavior, with documentation of the shell companies and offshore accounts, and with Derek's flight from the Phoenix restaurant suggesting consciousness of guilt, we had a strong criminal case. But Derek had one more surprise for us. 3 days after his arrest, his attorney, a slick criminal defense lawyer from Seattle named Bradley Fitzpatrick, held a press conference. I watched it live from my office, my team gathered around my computer screen. My client, Mr. Derek Mitchell, is the victim of a malicious and coordinated campaign of harassment by his ex-wife and her father, Fitzpatrick announced to the assembled reporters. Mr. Mitchell is a successful real estate investor who ended an unhappy marriage. Rather than accepting this and moving on, his ex-wife has enlisted her father, an attorney with apparently too much time on his hands, to pursue a campaign of legal harassment designed to destroy my client's reputation and business. I felt my jaw clench as Fitzpatrick continued. The so-called victims in this case are women who made poor investment decisions based on advice from Mr. Mitchell. When those investments didn't pan out, rather than accept responsibility for their own financial choices, they've decided to blame my client. This is nothing more than a shakedown, and we will be vigorously defending against these baseless charges. Sarah, watching beside me, looked stricken. Dad, people are going to believe him. He's going to make this about me being a bitter ex-wife. Let him try, I said grimly. We have 7 victims, not one. We have documentation of name changes and false identities. We have evidence of offshore accounts and shell companies. This isn't going to work. But I was more worried than I let on. Fitzpatrick was a skilled attorney, and this strategy, painting Derek as the victim of vindictive women, could be effective with the right jury. It played into existing biases and stereotypes, and it put the burden on us to prove not just that Derek had committed fraud but that his victims weren't complicit or somehow responsible for their own losses. Jennifer seemed to read my thoughts. We need to make this about more than just financial fraud, she said. We need to make it about the pattern of predatory behavior. The name changes, the fake identities, the targeting of specific types of women. That's not just fraud, that's something more sinister. She was right, we needed to reframe the narrative. I called a meeting with all the victims and their attorneys. Fitzpatrick is going to try to put you on trial, I told them bluntly. He's going to question your judgment, suggest you were complicit, imply that you should have known better. We need to be prepared for that, and we need to control the narrative before he does. What do you suggest? Rebecca asked. We go public, not with a press conference, that would look reactive. But we tell your stories properly contextualized through the right channels. Long-form journalism, investigative reporting. We show the pattern, the sophistication of his methods, the deliberate targeting. We make it clear that this wasn't just about money, it was about systematic psychological manipulation and betrayal. Over the next week, working with a journalist from a major newspaper who'd done extensive work on financial fraud and romance scams, we put together a comprehensive exposé on Derek Mitchell's decade-long crime spree. The article, which ran as a multi-part series, was devastating. It detailed each victim's story in their own words. It traced Derek's evolution from small-time scammer to sophisticated con artist. It revealed the plastic surgery, the name changes, the carefully constructed false identities. And it included an interview with Dr. Lisa Brennan, who described the red flags she'd ignored and how close she'd come to becoming victim number 8. But the most powerful part of the article was a section about Michelle Brennan, the nurse who'd committed suicide after Derek destroyed her life. The journalist had obtained Michelle's suicide note and interviewed her family, her friends, and her colleagues. The portrait that emerged was heartbreaking, a kind, caring person who'd been systematically broken by Derek's betrayal and theft. The article ended with a question: how many more Michelle Brennans were out there? How many other victims had we not found? How many had been too ashamed to come forward, too broken to seek justice? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours of the article's publication, 6 more women contacted us. 6 more victims we hadn't known about, scattered across the country, each with the same story of romance, marriage, theft, and abandonment. Derek's total victim count was now at least 13 women, with total theft exceeding $2 million. The additional victims changed everything. What had been a case about one con artist defrauding multiple victims became a case about a serial predator who'd spent over a decade systematically targeting and destroying vulnerable women. The FBI got involved, opening an investigation into wire fraud and interstate criminal activity. Forensic psychologists analyzed Derek's pattern and concluded that he showed classic signs of psychopathy: lack of empathy, grandiose sense of self-worth, pathological lying, and need for stimulation through criminal behavior. Bradley Fitzpatrick's defense strategy crumbled. It's one thing to argue that 1 or 2 women made poor investment decisions. It's another thing entirely to argue that 13 different women across 10 different states all coincidentally made the same poor decisions with the same man who just happened to be using different names and identities each time. The Portland DA, now working in coordination with federal prosecutors, brought a superseding indictment against Derek that included 37 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, identity fraud, and engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise. If convicted on all counts, he was looking at over 100 years in prison. But we still had the civil cases to pursue, and recovering the stolen money was proving difficult. Despite Timothy's excellent work in freezing the Cayman account, much of the money had already been moved through so many layers of transactions that tracing it was nearly impossible. The $1.2 million in the frozen account would be split among 13 victims, less than $100,000 each, and nowhere near what most of them had lost. That's when I had an idea that would prove to be the final blow to Derek Mitchell. Part 5: The Final Move. The idea came to me during a sleepless night 6 weeks after Derek's arrest. I'd been reviewing all the evidence, all the financial records, all the documentation of Derek's various schemes when something caught my attention. Among Derek's shell companies was one called Apex Development Holdings, which he'd used for several of his larger real estate scams. But unlike the other shell companies, which existed only on paper, Apex actually owned something: a small office building in a developing neighborhood in Portland that Derek had purchased 4 years ago for $800,000. The building had been purchased with money stolen from Amanda Chen, the veterinarian who'd been convinced to mortgage her practice to invest in what Derek called a can't-miss real estate opportunity. When the investment went south, Amanda lost her practice, and Derek claimed the building had been foreclosed on by the bank. But according to Timothy's research, the building hadn't been foreclosed. It was still owned by Apex Development Holdings, and thanks to the rapid development in Portland's neighborhoods, it was now worth approximately $2.4 million. Derek had forgotten about it, or more likely, he'd written it off as lost when he'd moved on to his next identity and new schemes, but it was still there, still registered to one of his entities and potentially recoverable. I called an emergency meeting of the legal team. "We've been thinking about this wrong," I told them, spreading out the property records for the Portland building. "We've been trying to trace the cash, but cash is fungible and easy to hide. But real property, actual physical property with deeds and titles and public records, that's different, that we can seize." Patricia Alvarez's eyes lit up. "If the building was purchased with proceeds from fraud, we can argue that it's an asset of the criminal enterprise and subject to forfeiture." Exactly, and not just forfeiture to the state. We can argue that the victims have a superior claim as the actual source of the funds used to purchase it. Jennifer was already pulling up case law on her laptop. "There's precedent for this. In cases involving fraud and theft, courts have ordered the sale of property purchased with stolen funds and directed the proceeds be distributed to victims." "But will it be enough?" Sarah asked quietly. "Even $2.4 million split between 13 victims." "It's not about the money," Rebecca Torres said firmly. "I mean, yes, the money matters, but what really matters is making sure he ends up with nothing, that he doesn't get to keep any of what he stole, that he loses everything the way he made us lose everything." The other victims nodded in agreement. We filed a motion to seize the Portland building, supported by extensive documentation showing how it had been purchased with funds stolen from Amanda Chen and potentially other victims. Derek's attorney fought it, of course, but the evidence was overwhelming. The building existed, it was owned by Derek's shell company, and the money used to purchase it could be directly traced to Amanda's veterinary practice. The judge granted our motion, and the building was seized and put up for sale. But I wasn't done. Timothy and I went through every single one of Derek's shell companies looking for other hidden assets, and we found them, not many but enough to matter. A condo in Miami, purchased under the name Pinnacle Holdings and used as a rental property, value $450,000. A boat slipped in San Diego, registered to Maritime Ventures LLC, value $180,000. 3 luxury vehicles registered to various LLCs and stored in different locations, combined value $225,000. Stock portfolios in 5 different brokerage accounts under various business names, combined value $680,000. Over the next 3 months, we systematically identified, traced, seized, and liquidated every asset Derek had accumulated through his decade of fraud. Some required lengthy legal battles. Derek's attorney fought each seizure, but the pattern was impossible to deny. Each asset had been purchased with identifiable stolen funds, Each was held under one of Derek's false identities or shell companies, and each could be directly linked to his criminal enterprise. The total recovery came to just over $4.8 million. It wasn't enough to make all the victims whole. Derek had stolen more than $2 million in cash that we'd never recover, and that didn't account for the emotional damage, the destroyed credit, the years of financial hardship. But it was substantial, and more importantly, it meant Derek would go to prison with absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, the criminal case moved forward. Derek's trial was set for 8 months after his arrest, and the prosecution's case was overwhelming. 13 victims testified about identical patterns of behavior. Financial records showed the elaborate shell game Derek had played with their money. His multiple identities were documented through court records showing name changes and plastic surgery receipts. The prosecution also introduced testimony from forensic psychologists about Derek's psychological profile, explaining to the jury how predators like Derek operated. They described the grooming process, the love bombing, the gradual isolation and manipulation, the way Derek had systematically identified and exploited each victim's vulnerabilities. Bradley Fitzpatrick tried every defense strategy in the book. He argued that the relationships were genuine and just didn't work out. He claimed the business ventures were legitimate investments that simply failed. He suggested the victims were exaggerating or even lying for financial gain. None of it worked. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 37 counts. Derek showed no emotion when the verdicts were read, just sat stone-faced at the defense table, his hands clasped in front of him. At the sentencing hearing 2 months later, the judge allowed victim impact statements. All 13 victims chose to speak, and I sat in the courtroom holding Sarah's hand as she stood before the judge and Derek and told her story. "Derek Mitchell didn't just steal my money," Sarah said, her voice steady and strong. "He stole my sense of safety, my ability to trust, my children's stability. He looked me in the eye every day for 7 years and lied to me. He held our children and made promises about their future while planning to abandon them. He erased our lives without a second thought because to him, we weren't people. We were just marks, just opportunities." She paused, looking directly at Derek for the first time. "But you made a mistake. You underestimated what happens when your victims have someone who refuses to let them be silenced. You underestimated my father and you underestimated all these women you tried to destroy. We found each other, we found our voices, and we made sure you'll never do this again." One by one, the other victims spoke. Rebecca Torres, Amanda Chen, Dr. Lisa Brennan, women whose names Derek probably didn't even remember, who'd been nothing more than entries in his ledger of conquests and thefts. Michelle Brennan's sister spoke on her behalf, describing how Michelle's suicide had destroyed their family and left a hole that would never be filled. When all the victims had spoken, the judge addressed Derek directly. "Mr. Mitchell, I've been on the bench for 23 years, and I've seen many criminals pass through this courtroom. But I've rarely seen someone who caused such deliberate, calculated harm to so many people with such complete lack of remorse. You identified vulnerable women, gained their trust, stole their assets, and discarded them without a second thought. You did this not once in a moment of weakness, but over and over again for more than a decade. You are in the truest sense a predator." The judge sentenced Derek to 45 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. At 53 years old, Derek would be 78 at his earliest possible release. He was also ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, though we all knew that was largely symbolic given that we'd already seized all his recoverable assets. As the marshals led Derek away in handcuffs, he looked back at the courtroom one time. His eyes met mine, and for just a moment I saw something that might have been recognition. Recognition that he'd finally met someone who wouldn't let him just move on to the next victim. Someone who'd matched his calculation with calculation of my own, his ruthlessness with determination, his decade-long crime spree with months of relentless investigation and prosecution. Then he was gone, and it was over. Epilogue: Rebuilding. The recovered assets were divided among the 13 victims according to a formula based on how much each had lost and their current financial circumstances. Sarah received $385,000, not enough to replace everything she'd lost, but enough to make a real difference. She used part of it to buy a modest house in a good school district. Not as nice as the one Derek had stolen, but it was hers with her name on the deed, and no one could take it from her. The rest she put in trust for Emma and Michael's education, with me as the trustee to ensure it would actually be there when they needed it. The other victims used their portions in similar ways, paying off debts Derek had created, rebuilding businesses, securing housing, starting over. Dr. Lisa Brennan, who'd lost the least financially but had been traumatized by her near miss, donated her portion to an organization that helps victims of romance scams and financial abuse. Amanda Chen used her recovered funds to open a new veterinary practice, and last I heard, she was thriving. Rebecca Torres went back to school and got her MBA, determined to use her experience to help other women protect themselves from financial predators. As for me, the case changed something in me. I thought I was done with active legal practice, content to consult, and enjoy my semi-retirement. But bringing down Derek Mitchell reminded me why I became a lawyer in the first place, not to argue contracts or defend corporations, but to help people who needed someone to fight for them. I didn't fully come out of retirement, but I did start taking on select cases, particularly those involving financial fraud against vulnerable victims. Jennifer Kowalski became my associate, and together we've helped dozens of people recover from cons and scams and frauds. James Chen and I now work together regularly, and Timothy Harrison has become a crucial part of our team. We've built something of a reputation as the people to call when traditional law enforcement isn't moving fast enough or when the case is too complex for victims to navigate on their own. Sarah and the kids are doing well. It took time, months of therapy, gradual rebuilding of trust and security, but they're healing. Emma, now 7, barely remembers the motel room or the fear and uncertainty of those weeks. Michael, at 4, has no memory of Derek at all, which Sarah considers a blessing. Last month, on the 1-year anniversary of Derek's arrest, all the victims gathered for dinner at Sarah's new house. We shared a meal, shared stories, shared laughter, and a few tears. We toasted to justice served and lives rebuilt. We toasted to Michelle Brennan, who didn't survive her encounter with Derek but whose memory drove us to ensure he'd never create another victim like her. And we toasted to the truth that monsters like Derek Mitchell only win when their victims stay silent and isolated. When those victims find each other, find their voices, and find someone willing to fight for them, even the most careful predator can be brought down. Derek is in a federal prison in California now, serving his 45-year sentence. I don't think about him often anymore. He's just another criminal who got what he deserved, locked away where he can't hurt anyone else. But sometimes, late at night when I'm working on a new case, I think about that moment in the courtroom when our eyes met. I think about how close he came to getting away with it all, how easily Sarah could have been just another forgotten victim, how many other Derek Mitchells might be out there right now, targeting new victims, perfecting their scams. And I think about Michelle Brennan and all the other victims we didn't find in time, and I renew my commitment to making sure that anyone who tries this kind of predatory fraud knows that there are people watching. People who won't let it slide. People who will chase you across state lines and through shell companies and offshore accounts until justice is done. That's my revenge in the end. Not just what I did to Derek Mitchell, though that was satisfying in its own right. My revenge is the work I do now, the victims I help, the predators I help bring down. Each case is a reminder that good people aren't helpless, that the system can work when you know how to work it, and that sometimes justice delayed is not justice denied. It's just justice being done right. Sarah told me recently that she started dadding again, carefully and cautiously, with her eyes wide open and her assets firmly protected. She's stronger now than she was before Derek, tempered by the experience but not broken by it. And she knows that if anything ever goes wrong again, she has people in her corner who will fight for her. That's all any of us can really do: fight for the people we love, stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves, and make sure that predators like Derek Mitchell learn that some targets fight back. And when they do, they fight to win.